Hi, I'm Amanda Yarnell, a veteran science journalist and head of the Center for Health Communication at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Working with journalists like me can help you translate your research findings and policy prescriptions, and it can help you serve the public good and fight misinformation. In this module, we'll talk about how you can navigate today's media landscape and engage with journalists effectively. And in doing so, do your part to ensure that everyone has access to high-quality health and science information. We'll cover three things in this module. First, we'll review the media landscape and what you need to know about journalists and journalism. Then we'll talk about how to vet a journalist's request. And finally, we'll run through tips for preparing for the interview, for doing the interview, and what to do after the interview wraps. Let's start by reviewing today's increasingly crowded and noisy media landscape. But before we dive in, it's worth remembering that despite the differences in their jobs, there's actually a number of things that good journalists and researchers like you have in common. For example, they both seek the truth. They both question biases and assumptions. They both prize accuracy. They both collect and report the facts. And they're both committed to sharing what they've learned with other people. But the media landscape in which those journalists work is vast and more fragmented than ever before. The outlets that you know, whether a big newspaper, public radio, or a cable news station, still employ journalists who cover health and science topics. But increasingly, because of continued financial pressures in the media industry, the journalists who are interested in your work may today work for a niche outlet that you may not have heard of, or even have their own TikTok channel, their own podcast, or their own newsletter. Some of these news sources are extremely credible, well-respected, and reach exactly the audiences that you most want to talk to, like the examples shown here. But others may have an agenda or funding sources that you don't want to support or associate yourself with. We'll talk later about how to find out whether a given outlet is one you want to talk to. Regardless of where today's journalists work, they need four things to do that work. The first is information. Information that's accurate, that's relevant, that's compelling, and that's useful. The second is sources, experts who are personable, who are engaging, and who can connect with their audience. The third is stories, good ones that people will consume and remember, maybe even act upon. And fourth, they need all of this on deadline, sometimes in a day or two, or even within the hour, because today's news consumers expect to get their news faster than ever before. So why might a journalist seek you out? It could be to follow up on your paper or preprint for a news story. It could be because they want you to help them evaluate the news value of another researcher's paper. Or they could be gathering information about a newsworthy topic on which you have relevant expertise. Say, for example, there's a global pandemic and you're an infectious disease expert. So how might they find you? The best journalists do their research. They search the scientific literature to see who's publishing on a topic and who's referenced. They look at conference lineups. And they get recommendations from universities, other scientists, or even their fellow journalists. Then they vet the names that they've collected by looking up your research website or your LinkedIn. So make sure that you're keeping those pages up to date. Use a professional headshot. Post a brief and compelling bio that makes your expertise clear. What do you work on, and why does it matter to the world, not just other scientists? And finally, don't forget to include how to contact you. Taking these steps makes it easy for journalists to find you and for them to determine whether you're the right fit for their current story before they waste your time. So they found you. Should you respond? Working with journalists can help you reach the audience that you want and make sure that key stakeholders understand the implications of your research findings and act on your policy prescriptions. But you don't have to talk to everyone. Be strategic and give your time to credible and influential reporters who work for the outlets that reach who you want to reach. Your organization's media relations team is a great resource as you assess which reporters and which outlets will help you meet your goals. Now we're going to talk about how to vet a journalist's request. What should you do when a reporter reaches out to you to talk? First, be as responsive as you can. Journalists work on tight deadlines, sometimes days, often hours, and if they can't speak to a source by deadline, they will move on to someone else. If they can't source a story by deadline, it will be dropped. If you simply don't have time, don't ignore the note. Instead, say, "I'd love to, but I can't fit it in, but please come back to me in the future." If you want to reconsider the request, acknowledge their email as soon as you see it, checking in on their deadline and whether they have any flexibility. Or if they reached you by phone, ask about their deadline, when you can call them back. Even buying yourself 15 minutes will help you prepare. Then do your homework. Research the reporter. Read their stuff to see how they approach topics and stories. And research the outlet. Reputable ones should have a lot of information available on their About Us page. Things like what they cover, who funds them, and increasingly information about how they do their reporting and editing, and the ethics guardrails that they use. And then research how the topic has been covered by that outlet specifically, and in the press generally. Spending even 10 or 15 minutes on this kind of research can pay big dividends. It's especially important in today's fragmented media landscape. Remember, many reporters are freelancers rather than staffers. There are niche outlets that you might not have heard of that are nevertheless influential. And an outlet's funding or agenda might not always be readily transparent from its homepage. If that all sounds daunting, your media relations team may be able to help. Give them a call if you need help digging into a reporter or an outlet. If your homework reveals that this interview is the right opportunity for you, decline politely. Never burn a bridge. If it reveals it's a good opportunity, go ahead and schedule the call. Let's say your vetting has revealed that this is a great opportunity, talking to a journalist, working for an outlet that's going to help you influence the people that you want to reach. Here are 10 tips that'll help you prepare for that interview. Number 1, think about the audience who's eventually going to consume this piece of journalism. For example, here's how 3 different outlets talk about the health effects of 2.5 micron particulate matter in wildfire smoke. A local TV station like this Seattle area Fox affiliate will distill out all the jargon to appeal to their broad audience in a spot that's just a few seconds long. A national newspaper like the Washington Post, since it has the luxury of delivering words on screen, has the space to be more specific and to explain some of the cause and effect in more detail. Whereas a niche science outlet like Nature uses terms that its scientist readers can understand, including an abbreviation like PM 2.5 on second mention. It also delivers the detail that its scientist readers expect. So keep the audience outlet and the journalist's experience covering science and health in mind as you prepare for the interview. How can you frame your message so that it's accessible and compelling for the reporter and for their audience? Tip 2 is to have your top 3 points ready. You can't cover all the ground in this interview. Instead, ask yourself, what are the 3 most important points that you think the audience needs to hear? Write those down. As you do so, ask yourself, do your points have broad impact on health? Are they connected to what's in the news right now? Do they highlight an injustice, an irony, a controversy? Do they have specific relevance to the audience that the reporter's story is likely to reach? For example, could they help them make an important or pressing decision? If so, you're on the right track. Finally, jot down an exemplary piece of evidence or data that buttresses each of these points, should the reporter ask you for an example. Tip 3 is to be ready to convey those points in short, conversational sentences. Think, not too short, not too long. Your answer shouldn't be 1 word, but it also shouldn't be 8 sentences. This will make it more likely that you're quoted in the story, and that your ideas get to the people that you hope to reach. Not sure how to start? Write down your main message, packaged in 1 or 2 sentences, as told to someone who's not in your field. And be ready to explain, why is this research important? Why is it surprising? Why might it matter to the average person? What's next? And remember to keep it conversational. You want to sound like a person, not like a robot. Tip 4 is cut the jargon. Jargon is a barrier to entry, to understanding, and to engagement. For example, in this study, 650 members of the general public read 3 paragraphs on technical topics. Some of them read jargon-filled versions. Others read jargon-free versions. The people who read the jargon-filled version had more difficulty understanding the information. Not surprising, right? But they were also less likely to engage with a topic in the future. So cut the jargon and the acronyms. Use plain language to make your point clear. Tip 5 is avoid hyperbole. Don't use these words and phrases, whether you're talking to a reporter or to your media relations team. Why? Well, that kind of hyperbole poses two risks. Some journalists may simply pass that hype on to their audience without additional examination. Meanwhile, smart journalists who see you overhype your findings will consider it a red flag and leave your interview on the cutting room floor. Either way, hyperbole doesn't serve your interests, nor does it serve readers' information needs. Next, don't mislead by omission. Be clear about the limitations of your study. For example, if your pitch is about research conducted on animals rather than humans, make sure that caveat is clear. In this press release, for example, the researcher's academic institution failed to mention that the study was just in mice until deep into the story. In fact, the lead of the press release actually includes the statement, in all likelihood, soybean oil is not healthy for humans. An overreach. Research has shown that this sort of exaggeration in press releases doesn't actually pay. It isn't associated with more news coverage. So make sure that you make caveats clear, whether you're talking with your media team or with a reporter. Tip 7 is tell a story. Reporters are looking for sources who can connect with their readers and who can make readers care about the facts that their story presents. Stories are the key. This is especially true if you're talking about your own research. For example, try telling a story of discovery, with setbacks and successes alike, or make people root for you. Try telling them why you got into the field, what drives you, or connect what you're seeing in your data to a deeper theme in the world around us. Stories like these can enliven up an interview and give reporters the human element that elevates a science story. Next is be culturally aware. Be ready to use appropriate, inclusive language to ensure that your quotes resonate with everyone you hope to reach. Beware stigmatizing terms like these. Consulting a resource like Fox's Language Please can help you use the culturally appropriate language that top newsrooms are increasingly requiring from their journalists and their content. You can find it at languageplease.org. Tip 9 is to speak only to what you know, not what you don't. Be transparent about the limits of your expertise. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. You can always bridge back to topics where you do feel confident. So you could try something like, I haven't looked closely at that issue, but what I am certain about is. And finally, practice, practice, practice. Find somebody that you trust to practice with, somebody who isn't an expert in your field and will give you honest feedback. Think someone in your communications office, a family member, maybe a friend. They can help you anticipate what questions you might be asked and help you practice how to answer them, crisply, authentically, and memorably. So the day is here. Here are a few things to remember as you sit down to do the interview. First, remember that you are more prepared than you think. You communicate with other scientists all the time. This is just a different audience and a different channel. You are the expert, and the reporter needs your expertise to serve their audience. Next, confirm the terms of the interview before you begin. Remember to ask the reporter, will the interview be live or taped? How will you use my audio and video? Who else might be participating? This last question is particularly important for TV or radio, where you want to know whether it's a live panel discussion with screened callers or an interview with just the host. Once you understand the terms, make sure that you're in a quiet space where you can have the conversation uninterrupted and with a professional backdrop if the conversation is via Zoom. Also remember that the reporter is usually not the adversary. In most situations, you and the reporter are working together to create something that people need. If there are signs that this might not be the case, don't hesitate to call in your media relations team for support on how to handle a hostile interview. Next, act like everything is on the record. Unless you are a seasoned pro, it's generally safest to simply answer as if everything you say can be attributed to you. Don't say anything or do anything that you wouldn't want to see published with your name attached. In the same vein, be careful about offering personal asides or comments during an interview. Even if you've already cultivated a relationship with a reporter, it's safest to stick to the subject matter at hand. and treat the interview as a professional conversation rather than a conversation with a friend. And don't forget to be comfortable with silence. You'll find journalists will pause to take notes or even to formulate their next question. Don't try to fill in that silence. You risk offering something off topic or maybe even not well thought out. And finally, the last thing to keep in mind is that you are in control. The reporter controls the questions they ask, but you have the floor and you're in total control of what you say. So don't be afraid to bridge back to your question, not theirs. For example, you could say something like, "The key thing to remember is," and remember to stay away from the old and tired no comment. Whew! All right, you made it through the interview. Now what? At the end of the interview, repeat your key point one more time. For example, you could try something like, "Thanks for the opportunity. It's really important that people know that your point here." It's one more opportunity to give them the great quote you want and they need. You won't see your quotes or the story pre-publication. At most outlets, such practices are banned explicitly by ethics policies. So instead, offer to be available if they have questions or need more background on the topic. So say something like, "Don't hesitate to call or email me with follow-up as you're working on the piece. I know this stuff is complicated and I'm happy to answer any questions that come up during fact-checking." In this way, you offer your support for their quest for accuracy without demanding control over their story. Finally, ask for the reporter to send you a link when it's posted so that you and your institution can promote it on social media. And of course, say thank you, assuming it was a good experience. After the story publishes, share it on social, tagging both the reporter and the outlet. If you see any factual errors, it's okay to alert the reporter, but make sure it's a factual error, a statement that's factually false. Not that you don't like the way the reporter phrased something, or that they failed to use the technical term, or even that they didn't fully explain the methodology. It's often a good idea to talk to your media relations team before reaching out about a correction. In any case, don't send suggested edits, complain about the headline, or complain about how little you are quoted. These responses are unlikely to be well received and could sour your relationship with the reporter or outlet. If you have questions about what's reasonable to ask or how best to ask it, your media relations team can help. In the weeks and months that follow, don't be afraid to reach out to the reporter if you'd like to build an ongoing relationship. Try offering an occasional interesting paper, an idea, or compliments on their coverage, but be judicious and succinct. Think of your own inbox. And don't feel obliged to re-engage with the reporter if it wasn't a good experience. Good or bad, sharing your experience with your organization's media relations team can help them help you the next time a call comes from a reporter. In fact, wherever you are in the process, don't be afraid to reach out to your organization's media relations team. For example, you might want to call them for support in deciding whether a journalist or an outlet is one you want to talk to. If you have any inkling that the conversation could be adversarial and you need help, coaching, or advice. If you need somebody to practice with. Or if you see an error in a journalist's story and want a gut check or advice on how to reach out. A good rule of thumb is, when in doubt, check in with your media relations team. For more information on interacting with journalists, visit the Center for Health Communications website, hsph.harvard.edu/CHC.